Good afternoon. It's 2 o'clock. I'd like to welcome you all to our panel. We're going to be talking about new development condos, looking back at 2020 and then looking ahead at what might come down the pike at 2021. Um, just a little background on Pincus Co. It's a real estate news and data platform. Our products include free newsletters, industry-focused articles, and data subscriptions. We have links for these products in the chat. So we've all seen that 2020 was a tough year, yet through it all, buyers kept buying and developers kept building. We'll run down some of the stats later and ask our panelists how they see the market looking back and then what they expect looking forward. And also ask about other factors like taxes and legislation that might impact how developers plan for 2021 and beyond. To get a sense of this, we're joined by Stuart Saft. He's the practice group leader at the law firm Holland Knight. He leads the New York real estate practice group and is co-chair of the firm's global condominium development and conversion team. He has extensive experience in condo development, financing, leasing, conversions, and more. And Adam Leitman Bailey is founder of Adam Leitman Bailey PC. His firm practices in both residential and commercial real estate. Adam has a deep experience in both condo development and in condo development litigation. So before we start, I'd like to remind our listeners to submit questions. We'll be taking them later in the program. There's a chat function at the bottom of the screen. So to begin with, I'd like to ask Stuart, when you're on a call today with a developer, are there ways that you approach products that are fundamentally different this year than they were last year?
Well, Adam, that's a very interesting question because much of what we do has a very long lead time. So a plan that I'm hired to do or a development that I'm hired for in 2021 will probably not see the light of day before maybe 2023 or 2024. We usually get retained when the developer first acquires or is thinking about acquiring the land. And then we're involved in the process of an assemblage, discussing how what kind of building should be built, how should it be built, size, things like that. So I'm still getting calls about new development. I'm even still getting calls about conversions. And there's a fair amount of interest, even though there's a large surplus of apartments at the present time, because developers are very optimistic. And in every cycle, there's some developers that get out just in time, and there are other developers that don't. And the distressed part of the cycle takes maybe 18 months to run the course, and then suddenly that huge inventory gets absorbed, and it's time to start planning new projects. So we're at the point now where we're just about at the bottom of the market. If somebody was going to go out and buy, this would be an opportune time to buy, but it's also the time that developers and property owners are thinking about the next wave. And it's just like in 2009, as Leitman was imploding and the market, the entire economy was in free fall, we were doing workouts at the same time that we were doing planning for the next generation of buildings. And by late 2012, early 2013, the bottom had been hit and the market started to go up and people started making purchasers based upon low prices. And by 2014, it was a feeding frenzy because the inventory was running low, the prices were going up. And by the time the rest of the country was coming out of the recession, prices in New York were already above where they were when the market collapsed in 2008 and 2009. And by the time we got to 2015, the every apartment that came on the market was sold almost instantaneously. And when you began to hear in 2016 about the market softening, it wasn't softening. It just didn't have the strength that it had a year before. And then by the time a lot of new projects opened in 2017, there was fear that the market was overheating, and that fear caused a slowdown because people were looking for bargains.
So right now, though, like if you're, I mean, that's kind of the large arc. Today, someone calls you up, like, is the sense like, hey, we better hold off? Or is the sense like, I'm going to go ahead anyway?
Everybody's going ahead anyway. I have to tell you that even during the pandemic, and of course, what we're living through right now is different than anything we've ever seen before. And if you give me a minute, I'll explain why. But as a matter of fact, let me do that right now. In every recession before now, there was a slowing process, and the bottom didn't fall out. There was it was just the market got softer and softer and softer. Then the stock market collapsed, and then the market began to recover again. And this all happened before the consumer even realized what was going on. This time, of course, it was different. This time, on February 28th, 2020, it was business as usual. And then all of a sudden on March 15th, everything closed. So developers went from having tremendous activity going on to nothing. Buyers were flocking in to buy, and then all of a sudden they were gone. My hotel clients are the ones that were hit the hardest because their hotels were 80% full, and then the next day they were empty.
Well, I'm going to put a screen up that just shows, and we can keep talking about this stuff, but I want to show the how, this is not a surprise, but the number of units sold, new development units, as we're tracking them, declined quite sharply, obviously.
Yeah, but that's, Adam, that's that you see, the important thing in this graph is that there were any sales at all in 2020. Think about that. And we've seen it firsthand. Every one of the projects that we're working on continued to sell apartments, people walking in, signing contracts, closing 4 to 6 weeks later. Even during the pandemic, when everybody was locked down, we were closing units that had been purchased sometime before. So the fact that, what is that, about 3,500 units were sold?
Yeah, that's
incredibly impressive considering what the economy went through this last year.
I'd like to pause for a minute and ask Adam, essentially the same thing. Like when you're talking to a developer right now, how is it different from last year?
Well, it's extremely different. The sky has fallen. So what does that mean? And it's different kinds of developers. So that's a loaded question. So the first developer is one that has money, has a lot of money saved, and a lot of units have sold, and they're well positioned, and they're gonna have to discount their units, and the rest will sell eventually, but maybe not at the prices they hoped.
Well, Adam, let me just reframe just to get more specific. I'm thinking about a developer who's got a piece of land and has not yet filed. And how are they thinking about planning that project? How is that different this year than last year?
Every developer that has a piece of land, the only thing they have to do, no one's abandoning that owns land. The only thing they're deciding is, do they sell it which is not the question because you can't sell it for a good number right now. So the only question is, do you do sales or rentals? That's it.
Mhm.
The only time you're selling it is when you're distressed.
But are people, when you're talking to them, are they like, I'm going into sales right now? Because it won't come out for 2-3 years. And so, or
Or
is it
you-
like, oh my
or-
God, overhang?
The people that are staying in New York and not leaving are believing in New York and looking at what's basically what Stuart's saying is New York will overcome this. May take a couple of years, but we're gonna build it, sell it, or rent it, and we're gonna come out the other side okay. Maybe we're not gonna be at the prices we were 2 years ago, but eventually we'll be back to normal. However, yesterday, we have a spreadsheet of, because we were the get out of the contract kings of the 2008 era. Maybe I'm self-proclaiming that, but because of the Elsa statute, not a good thing to do. We have a spreadsheet of people that want to get out of contracts. And yesterday, one of the developers missed a date. So the adversary, who's a former client who uses me when he wants to, but not enough for me not to go against them, calls up and I said, I can't speak to you, represented by counsel. His attorney sends the email so I can speak to him. I speak to him, said, I have a spreadsheet here. This isn't personal. I don't even know if the client, I don't even know anything about the client. They want their money back. They missed a date. That's simple. He says, well, what do they want? I go, I don't even know. They want their money back. I go, but I'm happy to try to negotiate it for you. But right now they want their money back. Please put in writing the discount that you want to give them, and I'll do the best I can, and I will.
But I want to talk about rescissions later, if that's sort of a version of that. But in terms of planning this year, I mean, sort of crystal ball, but Stuart, like there were approximately 3,000 plans, or 3,000 units within plans submitted this year, just condos, not talking about the co-ops and stuff like that. Is your feeling that that's going to go up, or it's kind of just going to stay at about the same?
You mean in 2020 there were 3,000 units offered?
Yes.
Yeah.
Submitted the original beginning of it.
My expectation is that it'll stay 2021 will not be that dissimilar to 2020. But then you're going to see significant growth in 2022. 2021, the filings in 2020 reflected what was going on in 2019. The filings in 2021 will reflect what happened in 2020. Now we have plans that we're already working on for 2021 filings and these are plans that first went in 2020 versus that first went in 2021. And the number of units is greater for 2021 than 2020. Now, the interesting thing is, just to go back to one of your earlier questions, we have 2 clients that completely finished the buildings they were working on in 2020 and decided neither to rent them nor to offer them for sale. They just basically sealed them up because they weren't prepared. They had the financial wherewithal to do nothing, but they weren't prepared to discount the apartments. So they're waiting for the market to strengthen, probably in 2021 or 2022. And when when it's the appropriate time, I'm happy to explain why I believe that the market is going to appreciate significantly over the next couple of years.
Let me take Stuart's first part. I believe that you will have many sales close this year, 2021, because there are many there are many buildings finishing, there are many people under contract, and they're refusing to close or they're negotiating. And because there hasn't been a market, what I'm saying is because many of the developers are discounting the units, but and the contractees, the buyers want a discount, but they're not coming to terms. And this is big in my office. There's going to be a lot of those closings happen in 2021. They're happening now, and they're going to happen through the year. So you may not hit the number of 2020, but you will have closings.
There's a disagreement on they're trying to get essentially a price break, and you think
everyone seems to be, in my world, maybe not in Stuart's, everyone wants a discount, a price break,
even though they signed a contract at X amount.
I know that's surprising, right? No,
well,
yes, everyone wants a discount, and most of the developers are giving that because they rather have it sold for a price that was pre-pandemic than the black hole they would sell for now. So they are looking at discounts and they're having trouble agreeing. Then we have tons of clients in my office that are just waiting to see if the sponsor is going to screw something up and fall into the rabbit hole, one of our rabbit holes or traps, as we call them. And if they do that, then they don't have to close. So there's going to be a lot more closings than you think in 2021 that were contracts signed pre-pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
Could I comment on this?
Please.
Yeah.
Okay. So the real estate development climate has changed dramatically in the decades since the financial crisis. Prior to the financial crisis, most of the real estate construction was financed by commercial banks and other regulated institutions. And so the lenders are required to create more regulatory capital if to default. So during the recession, prior to and during the recession a decade ago, the prices were marked down by the lenders who had to get out because the regulators were forcing them to get rid of the inventory. When Dodd-Frank was enacted, those of us who do this kind of work were concerned, or at least I was concerned, as to where the construction capital was going to come from, because Dodd-Frank made it virtually impossible for large commercial banks to be involved in real estate development. And one of the unintended consequences of the financial collapse is that private equity funds, hedge funds, sovereign wealth funds came into the market and did something they never did before. They started buying up these incomplete buildings and saw it as a great profit because they were able to buy the building for 60 cents on the dollar, and the market improved, and suddenly they had a windfall on their balance sheet, and they could do it because they weren't regulated. So there wasn't a regulator that said you had to do this, that, and the other thing. In this cycle, unlike prior cycles, most of the real estate development was financed by those hedge funds, private equity funds, sovereign wealth funds, who came into the business with the following attitude: if everything went great and everyone and they were paid off, all the apartments were sold and they were paid off, then they'd get their principal, they'd get their interest, they'd get whatever back-end fees they were supposed to get. It was a good deal. If the developer defaulted and the lender got to take over, then it's a home run, because then they're basically getting the asset for 60 cents on the dollar, as they did during the hedge fund, during the financial crisis, and they wind up with a trophy asset that they paid a minimal price for as their financing, and it's a home run for them. So there's less pressure on sponsors this time around to cut prices to make deals, because the decision on pricing is really made by the lender. There are minimum release prices in all of the development agreements that we enter into, because the lenders want to The only part of the process they want to have control over is to make sure the apartments aren't being given away. So
you
it's
think
the lender's decision whether to sit there and hold or sell. I'm sorry, Adam.
But you think that'll create essentially a floor, so it won't go, just the prices won't keep falling, or that's keeping them elevated.
In fact, that is what we're seeing. Nobody, except in a very limited situation, nobody is cutting prices by 30%. You'll get 10%, you'll get 15%, you'll get some fees picked up, but it won't be the bargain basement type of thing that you would expect and that we would have experienced 20 years ago. And it's a very important component, because as a result of the change in the way construction is financed, the purchase of condominiums has become far safer, because there is a construction lender that's sitting there that wants to protect its investment in the property. And the construction lender may decide, if the closing hasn't happened yet, that they'll just offer everybody rescission and hold on to the asset until the market improves.
And looking towards next year,
Yes.
Are you seeing that also? Is it still you think the financing is going to be from private equity or alternate capital?
There's no question about it. The big commercial banks cannot get back into it other than acting as an administrative agent. So you may see the name of a large commercial lending institution on the documents, but it's not their money, it's not their loan. They're acting as an agent for the people who put the money together.
And one thing, just sort of jumping back to the idea of what we can expect in terms of filings for the coming year. And Adam, if you want to look at this, but we did a little analysis of the past couple of years of the difference between when a property was purchased and then when the filing was made, the submission, and it was about 2 to 2.5 years. Are you in touch with developers who have parcels who are saying, I want to wait another year? Like, do they want to hold on even longer, or do they want to kind of get in the ground now?
I don't have the client base of developers that Stuart has, but we have two clients and we have 2 clients in the list that you have on your list there. Both of them were already moving along by the time the pandemic happened. We don't do offering plans. We review them and tell the developers, here's what we think people could sue on. Here's how to make it litigation proof. Here's how to improve your offering plan. So we were asked to do so on both of these clients. One before the pandemic and one right after. But they were already, that means the train had already left the station. So both of them are pro development, both believe that, like Stuart, which I don't agree with Stuart's timeline, but both believe that this is not going to be a long-term depression. I believe it's going to be a long-term depression for different reasons as Stuart. And they're pro New York, pro sales, and they pushed it through.
So why do you think it's going to be a long-term, just from the condo perspective?
Because I think there's something worse than a pandemic that happened to New York. That didn't happen to Florida. It didn't happen to the states that continued doing business. Ronald Reagan once said, the eight scariest words in English language. I'm from the government and I'm here to help. Our government, instead of saying I'm here to help, said, how can I destroy you, real estate? How can I make your lives as miserable as possible? And they did. And they passed every law they possibly could think of.
Well, those are rental.
A little bit smarter, they would have passed worse. But they really made our lives as difficult as possible. And it's very difficult to do business here. And a lot of the developers and CEOs are seeing that. And
let's talk about it specifically.
I'm not seeing a lot of people leave as much as I thought I would, but many have.
To focus on one of the issues is the idea that guarantees have been, you can't get guarantees on some kinds of loans now, but I don't think that's impacting construction loans.
No,
Wait, you can't get,
You can't enforce the guarantee from
you mean the New York City guarantee law?
right. Like, is that impacting, I'd like to ask about things that are impacting the current condo development, not,
So those only affect 5 categories? And those only affect 5 categories, and none of that affects condos or development? Those affect restaurants, gyms, people in distress concerning retail.
okay. Well, what about the pied-à-terre tax? Like, how are you looking at that? Is that going to have do you think that would have an impact?
Number one is it going to pass? And will that have an impact? I mean, I think every law that passes that harms, that costs people more money or harms business will have an impact. I don't think it's a death knell like a guarantee, a law, or shutting down restaurants. That really hurts.
I think I disagree with Adam on that. I think the PAT tax has tremendous opportunity to do damage across the board because it's not what its sponsors were advertising it to be. It is not a tax on billionaires buying $50 million apartments in New York. It's a proposal that is so badly written that it could apply to anyone who, even on fixed income. For instance, I bought my apartment 35 years ago. I paid relatively negligible amount of money. I raised my kids there. It's now has well, before the pandemic hit, so we'll assume after the pandemic is over, it would place me in that category. And if I was ever to retire, which I cannot imagine it ever happening, and I decided to spend 6 months a year somewhere else, my New York apartment would not be my primary residence. I would be on a fixed income, and the tax would apply to me. The tax also is based upon this idea that if you have a single family home worth more than $5 million, it's applicable. Or if you have a co-op or condo with an assessed value of more than $300,000, it's applicable. The problem is a $300,000 assessed value means a $2 million apartment. And there are loads and loads of $2 million apartments. It's a particular problem for co-ops because there aren't separate tax lots in a co-op.
But
So
just, not to, I think this is interesting, but I don't want to go down too
okay,
far.
fine. But
If
my
that's,
answer to Adam is that I'm getting calls on a regular basis because I had a practice group in a global law firm that has 26 offices in the United States. So people walk into our other offices and say, I'm thinking the prices look good in New York. I'm thinking of buying an apartment in New York to use whenever I go there. And maybe when my kids will go to NYU or Columbia. And so there's always a market for second homes in New York City. And I'm getting calls from my other offices saying, what is this about this tear tax? What's it going to mean? How is it going to affect me? My client was all ready to buy an apartment, but now have second thoughts because they're not going to want to. Real estate taxes in New York are ridiculously higher than what we pay here. They're not going to want to pay an additional tax. So the problem here is not billionaires buying apartments, it's people buying apartments for second homes. If you suddenly reduce the number of people who are buying $20 million apartments, those $20 million apartments are going to sell for $10 million. That'll cause, Adam, just let me finish, Adam. That'll cause $10 million apartments to sell for 5 and 5 for 3. So it's the average homeowner who suddenly is, the market is going to lose X percent, whether it's 20% or 80% of buyers because of this tax. They're going to be gone from the market, and that will impact the sales price of everybody's apartment or house.
but looking at it from the other side, wouldn't it theoretically, by depressing it, sort of cramming down the sort of the demand from above, you would then have land worth relatively less money, so someone could build for $1 and $2 million apartments instead of building for 10 and $20 million apartments.
It's real. The issue is not building 10 or 20 million versus 1 or 2. Land costs in New York are extraordinarily high. The construction costs are high. It takes 5 years to get through the approvals you need in order to build. So you're forced to charge higher prices because it's so expensive to do this in New York. And therein lies the problem. It's not all of a sudden, if 57th Street wasn't Billionaires Row, they weren't going to be building affordable housing there because the costs were so high. And so what will happen is the development will slow. So here's the other half of the problem that we can't lose sight of. The legislature was toying with the pied-à-terre tax, and I'm sorry, I don't speak French, so I'm not pronouncing it correctly. Was playing with this PAT tax 2 years ago and realized it would have an adverse impact on the entire economy, and instead increased substantially the transfer tax and the mansion tax. And those taxes were used to support the bond offerings to pay for rebuilding the subway system and mass transit. As soon as this PAT tax was introduced in January, the underwriters of those bonds saw the price of the bonds going up, the interest rate on those bonds going up, and in order to sell them, they had to reduce the price of the bonds. And so the city, if the city picks up $100 million, if the city and the state pick up $100 million, Martha Stark, the former finance commissioner, has estimated the city and the state is losing $670 million in taxes and fees because of what that $100 million in income is going to cost the city and the state. So it just hasn't been thought out at all. It's just an idea that somebody had that there's some additional money they can glom onto.
I agree with Stuart. It's a really bad idea. Worse for me, though, much worse, is the change in the criminal laws, you know, the cash bail, where our city is now unsafe, where the crime rate is increased incredibly.
Well, here, Adam, let's.
You can raise taxes. You could put in a period. You could put on.
I'm going to stick with condo development right now.
Okay, go ahead.
Or something like close to it. But actually, I do have a question on buyer strategies. I was looking at going through court cases. I've seen these rescission people. These are individuals. Somebody at 80 Adams, somebody at 25 Park Place, someone at 130 William. They've got sort of different things. One person was complaining that the ceiling wasn't as high as they had been promised, and some just that the construction is late. How do you navigate that kind of world?
So the ceiling's not as high, less than 10% is the loser. They're going to lose that case. What's the next one?
No, I don't want to go over case by case. I'm just
giving you.
People.
I mean, most of the cases filed are not done very well. It's very hard to win one of those cases. You know, we lose cases too. It's tough.
No.
Yeah, it's tough. Yeah, that's how I lose sleep. But there are ways to win. Most of the time, though, when you're going to win, they don't ever go to court. You show the developer, or the developer shows us, and we're like, oh, we can't have this out there, and it settles right away.
But it would be what is that? That's something like there's mold in the walls or something, or what kind of thing?
Had it yesterday, too high of a price. Building couldn't find out about it, and the case is over. Confidentiality agreement signed, and the theory will never get out.
And what was the reason? And was it construction or like bad neighbors?
Something in the offering plan
was incorrect, and so theoretically, if someone else found that, they could then go in the same door, basically.
If anyone else found that, in my humble opinion, that everyone in the building could get out of the contract.
You know,
and there weren't enough closings done yet.
My friend Adam Leitman Bailey over here has been involved in some of the most interesting matters you can imagine, and he and I have been friends for what, 15 years?
Yes.
And maybe longer. And I can never find, and he negotiates these things, and a word will slip out somewhere in the press. And in all the years, I've never been able to find out from him what the true story was. But
None of these cases, for example, the Central Park South, big article in the Real Deal, right? And they went over all these secrets. We had the big secret in that case, and it still hasn't gotten out. Not ever going to get out. For the penthouse, still not out, never going to get out. But we found something that was foolproof. They got their money back, and we kept their mouth shut. Still kept their mouth shut. We're never giving it out.
So
and I thought getting the article, they would figure it out, and they couldn't do it.
So another rescission question. There's this property called, or development called ABI Chelsea Condo, or on West 19th Street. They, in October, filed an amendment saying that buyers had the option, had a 15-day window to take them up on a rescission.
You go get your money back, right?
How does that work? Like, what if, I guess, what if enough people get it?
When we approach a developer, we say, you have a problem. The good developers, the Stuart Safts of the world will come to us and say, Adam, I don't agree with you, but let's sit down. And then Stuart will say, tell me what your theory is. I'm listening, because he's a very good attorney. The bad developers will say, you're crazy, you're wrong, I don't want to hear it. Click, they hang up on me. So then I have to contact the Attorney General's office. The Attorney General does not take cases on new bad defects, new construction cases anymore, because they don't want to spend 6 years litigating it. But they will take cases when material things are missing from the offering plan, or there's something in the offering plan, something wrong with the offering plan. Those cases they'll take because they're easier to deal with. So when a developer hangs up on me, then I send a letter to the AG, and the AG is going to do what they have to do, and they give a rescission period for the entire building. And then I get a call afterwards. Can you stop this? I go, no, I tried calling you. I only wanted to represent one unit. Now the whole building is taking advantage without paying me and getting out of the contract.
Wait, we just, okay, other than the PR.
I hate helping. It's really hurts me that I don't get paid to help the whole building. It bothers me a lot.
All right. No, just, so a question. So this building, but things like that, is it typically like 1% of the people do rescission, or like the whole thing's blown out of the water and it doesn't go? What about their effectiveness?
After March 15th, the entire building is gonna take rescission, and some will negotiate abatements, and others will get their money back, depending on how much of a discount they're getting offered.
Huh. And then, so I guess we'll see. So Stuart, it's sort of shifting again back to, I want to get kind of in the head of when you're in sort of the nitty gritty of hammering out plans, which I assume you're doing right now, or sort of thinking about that. Looking this year at the pipeline, what is your sense of how it's going to be? Like, if it's going to be sort of 4,000, but like, is it going to be bigger buildings, smaller buildings, more in Brooklyn, more in Queens?
That's an interesting question. And the size of the building really has a lot to do with what it costs to acquire the land, what it's going to cost to build the building, and of course, the available FAR and rights to build the building, and you know, an in-depth understanding of the city's zoning code. So it's really the site that determines how big the building is going to be, rather than what the developer, in most cases, what the developer would like. Frequently, when we have a developer who wants to build a large building in a certain location, it takes years and years to put together the assemblage, because we have to buy pieces that don't give the appearance that this is what's about to happen. So it's a very slow, meticulous process, just putting the land package together. Because if you just take, one 100-foot by 60-foot building, 6,000 square feet, there's just so much you can build on that site. And if it's a mid-block site, then you can't go up more than double the width of the street. So you're certainly looking for being able to do something on an avenue. A corner is even better because you get to double both the avenue and the street. And that's where you start off. The starting point is, what are you buying and how large can you build there compliant with zoning law, or how much can you obtain in available zoning rights from adjacent properties in order to maximize the size of the building. When you start off in the process early, you really have control of the field. And as you go on and people begin in the neighborhood begin to get smart about what's going on, the price gets higher. And then you run into, the guy who wants too much. We did probably a decade and a half ago, a huge complex, and we bought up all of these sites for the client. And there was one piece in the front, a little piece, and it had a pizzeria in it. And this was just a tiny slice in the front of the building, or what would be the front of the building. And this guy wanted $5.5 million. And my client just said, there's no possible way I'm going to pay $5.5 million for that piece. And basically, he had offered $3 million. The guy wouldn't take it. He thought he was in the catbird seat. My client decided, you know what? We'll build around him. And so this huge building went up around the pizzeria, but the construction was so active that the pizzeria went out of business. And the guy could have had $3.5 million for basically a shack, and wound up getting nothing. And the building has a little indentation in the front. That was funny. I mean, the story about this, there was a woman on Queens Boulevard in Queens when they built the Macy's who refused to sell her house, and she lived there until her death, and is surrounded by the Macy's parking lot, because this was where she lived and she didn't want to give her home up. And I can understand that. But my point is that it's the site that determines what's going to be built, and how large the building is going to be. And we have, and in point of fact, we're working on a site that is a combination affordable and condo, not high-end condos, but condos. And it's a huge site. And it was planned for several years from now, because of all the preparatory work you have to do for basically a square block that's going to have 4 towers. And so we always knew it was coming to the market in like 2025, and that's when it's going to happen.
Do you think there's going to be more of those? There's a lot of affordable housing going up right now, especially relative to other construction. Is there going to be more affordable joining with market rate condos?
I see it happening. The problem which is causing hesitation among a lot of developers is this concept that you have to mix up the apartments, and it's hard to do that, because somebody who's paying $5 million for an apartment doesn't want to live next door to an apartment that's probably worth $200,000 or $100,000. So it becomes, and it has nothing, it just has to do with the nature of your buyer rather than anything else. But I think the reality is that no matter how much affordable housing you build, it's not enough. And the reason it's not enough is because it takes so much time, and it's so expensive to build, and there are so many rules to develop, that nobody wants to build enough housing to be able to accommodate the amount of housing you need. And the problem we have now, and it's the old saying that the road to hell is paved with good intentions. I had a number of clients who were thinking about building affordable housing before the Housing Security and the Tenant Protection Act was enacted. And now, of course, the legislature is thinking about a good reasons bill so that you can't even evict a difficult tenant until you.
So what are they going to do with their land if they have a? Are they going to sell the land or?
They hadn't closed on the land. They haven't closed on the land as yet. They haven't purchased it because the Housing Security and Tenant Protection Act was enacted in 2019.
June.
And then at the beginning of 2020, this good reasons bill was introduced in the legislature. So a lot of developers said, hey, wait a minute, we got to think about this. And so they're very nervous about building rental housing because of the restrictions that have now been placed upon landlords in the law, which of course was intended to help tenants, but it's caused concern.
What do they do?
Adam, let me just finish this by developers and more importantly, their lenders. The lenders are concerned.
Like if they have it, are they going to just land bank it or do they sell?
Well, frequently the developers have an option on the land.
They'll flip it, someone else will.
Or they'll just walk away from the option.
Right.
Okay. Nobody, let's say the land is going to cost, I'll just take a number out of the air, $50 million. And nobody's going to spend $50 million for the land unless they know that they can build and use whatever it is going to go on that land. So instead of buying it outright, they enter into an option agreement and they say to the owner, we'll give you X dollars, maybe, $250,000 for the option. And we have 2 years to do all our studying, everything like that. And then we'll decide what to do. And so the developers, if they don't think they can do something with the land that makes sense, are just going to walk away from the options.
Right. Yeah. Well, I guess someone else will pick it up. But so just a couple of kind of round robin questions. The just prices right now. I guess Adam first. Like, do you expect prices to fall more, or do you think we're kind of at the bottom for condos, new dev condo sales?
I believe that as soon as everyone has a vaccine, prices will go up. We'll have an epiphany of good times like the roaring 20s for a period of time, and then we're going to be in a deep depression for a number of years. The government has made it impossible to make money.
Oh, all right.
They've basically destroyed our economy. The laws that Stuart just mentioned have made it impossible to want to get into the business of owning land.
Well, here, we'll talk about that. We'll do another.
We need a new government.
We'll do another panel.
We're in a deep depression.
We'll do a government panel, but okay.
I will do a podcast with Adam any day of the week. He is the most entertaining person I know.
Thank you very much.
Very entertaining. So another question: are lower mortgage rates? Is that a motivating factor to get people back in the market, or sort of push people back in?
I believe this is the best time ever since the American Revolution to buy New York City land. It's phenomenal.
The depression that's coming in 3 years.
Money is cheap. Money is cheap. It's hard to get a loan because it takes so long, but when you can get one, it's phenomenal as long as you believe in owning long term. If you believe in New York City long term, this is the best time to ever buy.
Okay, this is a question that sort of puts together the rental stuff, and I don't want to go deep into legislation and stuff like that, but just the impact of the.
Uh,
or why the government's sitting on your lap right now in your pockets all over.
Okay. Wait. Let me talk about why I disagree with Adam's doomsday scenario, and why I think this is the best time to buy virtually anything.
tied to condos, though. We have to tie this to condos.
It will definitely be tied to condos. It's very simple economics, and I know a lot of people don't believe in supply and demand and everything we learned in college and the Samuelson Economics 101 course. But in reality, we are capitalists, and it all comes down to what makes sense. And I privatize Mitchell-Lama complexes. When I walk in, they're all socialists talking about rental programs, and when I leave, they're all capitalists talking about how much their apartments can be worth.
Right.
So, but it's very simple. Last year, the federal government pumped into the economy $5 trillion. At the end of the year, they put in another $2 trillion. The Biden administration, bless its soul, is coming in to do infrastructure and to protect the economy. So I see another $3-4 trillion getting pumped in. Okay, so you have 10 to 12 trillion dollars of fresh new money coming into the economy. You look at the gross multiplier effect. That 10 to 12 trillion dollars is 100 trillion to 120 is about 100 trillion dollars of economic value, not for the wealthy and not for just the middle class and not just for lower income people, for everybody. And it's going to trigger inflation. There's no possible way we can get around this, what has just been done to get us through the pandemic without inflation, which means that every hard asset, whether it's a co-op, a condo, a single family house, an office building, a shopping center, assuming you can get it occupied, every single hard asset is going to go up in value, including all of these unsold condominiums that are sitting there today that our clients are building tomorrow and our clients are building next month. And plus, the Federal Reserve has basically opened the window and say, do what you can. As bad as the pandemic has been, if the government and the Federal Reserve had not jumped into this with both feet last spring, we would be sitting here in a combination of pandemic and huge depression. And we're not. Unfortunately, the pandemic is still here, but the economy is strengthening every day. And so, and the other thing we're seeing is around the country, states are all now suddenly all supporting $15 an hour minimum wage. So that's also going to force up more dollars into the economy. The wonderful thing about our system is that it's not a zero-sum game. If Adam becomes rich, it doesn't mean that you and I can't become rich. Everybody can become rich. And the game we're going to be playing, or the reality we're going to be playing over the next couple of years, is how to deal with the inflationary spiral. That's also going to make paying back all of this borrowed money much cheaper. So I don't see Adam's doomsday scenario. I do see the need to get the government more efficient in how it operates. And I'm very shocked at something, and that is after 9/11, I thought we were totally unprepared for 9/11, but we will never be unprepared for catastrophe again. And then Superstorm Sandy came along. And I said, how could we possibly have been so unprepared for Superstorm Sandy that we have this horrible situation? And now we've gone through this pandemic, and government was totally unprepared for pandemic and how to deal with it. And a lot of bad mistakes were made at every level of government. Nobody.
We got to bring it back to condos.
I'll be back to condos in a second.
But here, wait, I want to ask a specific question about the boroughs. We've talked sort of generally a lot, but I guess Adam first. Do you have any sense of which borough might see more activity in sales or planning this year?
During a depression, I always believe that the strongholds will do the best. So Manhattan has traditionally been the strongest borough. I believe it'll rise first, then Brooklyn, then maybe Upper Manhattan. Harlem maybe do better than, Harlem may do better than maybe parts of Queens, but, and then Staten Island versus Queens toss up. And then the Bronx last.
Brooklyn, I mean, is still doing pretty. Brooklyn and Queens are doing pretty well for condos, so they didn't get too many of these like super expensive ones. So, like, how do you? I don't see those as even that far down. Or Stuart, are you doing any?
See, I'm thinking about one thing: crime. The police are disenfranchised. They're upset. Crime is way up. You can't keep someone on bail. You want to move to a place where it's going to be safe. You're going to stay away from crime-ridden areas. So Manhattan's the safest. Southern Brooklyn is safe. Parts of Queens are very safe. You want to go to a place where the schools are good, the public schools are the best, and your family's going to be safest. And that's where I'm betting on where you're going to buy condos.
Let me just say that I think the whole idea of defunding the police is the worst idea I've ever heard.
We agree. Completely.
Because the people who are going to suffer the most.
Wait, we got to bring it to condos.
People. I'm coming back to condos.
These condos, where you live's got to be safe or nothing's going to sell.
And that's the problem, because wealthy and upper middle class people can hire private security. The people who are living at, for instance, New York City Housing Authority, which is an embarrassment that people are forced to live in these slums, and that the city and state have done nothing over the years. They should all be turned into condos and turned, you see, I brought it back, and turned over to the people who are forced to live there. And we should put a fund together to fix up those buildings and give them ownership of them, because the city should not be in the business of being a landlord.
So okay, now a kind of an end question. If somebody is coming into the business right now, what would be your advice to how to buy or how to plan something? And would you start out in the boroughs? Would you start in Manhattan somewhere? I guess.
I've done, I did virtually no development in Brooklyn for my entire career. I did conversions in Brooklyn, but no development in Brooklyn until about 8 years ago. And I think that in this cycle, I've done like 3,000 units in Brooklyn. And I love Brooklyn. I have to tell you that I was born in Brooklyn. You could tell from the accent. I was born in Brooklyn, and then we moved to Queens. But Brooklyn is being in many locations in Brooklyn, it's like being in Paris. And I don't think that most Manhattanites really appreciate the elegance of many of the neighborhoods in Brooklyn.
This is a man who's my neighbor who lives around the corner from me in Manhattan. Go ahead, yeah.
And I grew up in Queens, and there's something so pastoral about Queens. Yes, it has big tall buildings, it has Queens Boulevard, it has Northern Boulevard, but there's something very homey about Queens. And then you look at the Bronx, and of course it's the home of Yankee Stadium, so it can't be bad. And there's a lot of good available land up there that could be developed. I spent a number of years rebuilding a Co-op City and Parkchester, and they have lovely neighborhoods in the Bronx that are underappreciated by everybody else. So I can't tell you there's any place that's better or worse in the city. I think that a long time ago, when I was working down on Wall Street, there was a subway strike, and I was living on 81st Street at the time, and I decided that I would walk home every day and walk in the morning, and I would take a different path. And I realized that New York, first Manhattan and then the rest of the city, is not this one megalithic city. It's really a lot of little neighborhoods that are pieced together to form the fabric of our city. And in that regard, it is just the most wonderful city, and a great, people who like to walk, it's a great walking city. So
let me, on that, pay on to our city that we all live in.
I
we
can
got-
answer the question, though. He
What's that?
forgot to answer it. I'm kidding.
Well, we'll do that next week. But I wanted to thank Stuart and Adam for talking today about the 2020 and what might happen in 2021. Thank everyone for joining us. This is going to be recorded. We'll be sending out a recording of it later, and we're going to have another panel next month. And so watch for the topic. And thanks very
Somebody
much.
asked the question, and the
Yep.
answer is buy now. It's not getting much lower. And Adam, thank you so much for having us and for allowing us to, Adam Leitman Bailey and I, to do our sidewalk act for you.
I second that. It's always an honor speaking with Stuart Saft and being on your show, Adam. And to answer the question, buy where you know. Make sure you don't borrow too much money where you're going under. Try to not sign personally, but you may have to. And if you buy where you know and you know the prices of what it could probably sell for, then you know what you're doing. You agree with that, Stuart?
Absolutely.
Okay, that answers the person's question. Someone in the Q&A asked that question. That's right.
All right. Well, thank you, and good afternoon.